So I wanted to do something special for reaching 100 subscribers. I figured I'd introduce myself to you guys. This video is going to be very personal. I'm actually a recovering addict and I'm going to share a few stories with you. One of these stories is from my fiance's perspective, and she's here to guest narrate the story that she had to experience because of me. One more thing before we get started. Thank you all so much for the support and the comments and the critiques. I take what you all say to heart and I appreciate all the love. I also want to thank Joey's Nightmares and Let's Read for helping me get my name out there. You're all fucking awesome. With that being said, let's begin. I was 17 years old when this happened. I met an older guy at a bar I snuck into. We exchanged numbers so that I could contact him for whatever drugs he sold. Shortly after meeting him, I received a phone call from him. Surprisingly, he wanted something from me. He asked me if I could find him a quarter pound of weed. I knew a distributor at the time, and I figured I'd hook the two of them up. I thought maybe they could do business together regularly. I called my weed guy and asked him if he could hook my new friend up. He asked a few questions first, naturally. First, he asked what his name was, and then he asked where he lived. I told him the street name and he paused. He said, "I heard about a guy that lives over there. He buys shit with counterfeit money." I told him it was okay if he didn't want to take the chance. I could always just tell the guy I couldn't find the weed. My weed guy surprisingly said, "Fuck it, let's go." I was a little worried because I didn't want to be responsible for the loss of a large amount of cash and drugs, but I shook it off and waited to get picked up. My weed guy picked me up, and we drove to our destination. This specific street is known for criminal activity and shady people. There are also like 0 streetlights there, so it makes the street extra dark and creepy. We pulled up to the house, which was a big apartment house that looked like it had 6 to 8 apartments inside. There were no lights on in the hallway and didn't seem to be any lights on in the house. There were 2 men standing in front of the door as if they were on guard. We walked up to the steps and approached the men. They asked us who we were here for and we told them. They moved apart and let us through. There was another man on the bottom of the stairs in the dark. He directed us to the 3rd floor. We walked up the stairs where on each level there were men guarding. We finally got to the door where we were met by yet another man. He stayed silent and knocked at the door for us. The door opened and a woman that didn't seem very friendly, surprise, surprise, answered it. The guy I went to meet was inside sitting at a table with 2 other men. One of them got up, actually pat us down and checked us for wires. They didn't take their eyes off of us, even when we were cleared. My poor weed guy gave me a look like, "Fucking seriously?" And I just shot an "I'm so sorry" look back at him. The guy we went there to meet, let's just call him Kenny, came up to us with a gun tucked into the side of his jeans over his shirt and started talking to us as if everything was normal, as if none of this fuckery was actually happening. He kept saying, I got you, as if he was the one selling us something. He told us to put the stuff on the table. We did, and he gave us the cash, directing us out immediately. As we were leaving, we saw 2 children in pajamas walking out of the room. Nobody said anything to us in the hall on the way out. The men that were in the hallway and in the front were now back in the apartment. We got in the car and just looked at each other in shock. Weed guy took a quick look at the money and said, "Looks good." We drove off silently to my house where I got dropped off. I sat at home stressed out and freaked out when my phone rang. It was Weed guy. He said, "Call Kenny. Tell him to get those kids out of the house right now. The money is fake. My boys are on the way there and they're packing heat. That door is getting kicked the fuck in. Call him now." I felt so bad for being part of him getting ripped off, but now I was really scared. I had to call this guy that has a gun tucked into his pants, sound intimidating, and tell him to take his kids out of the house. I debated for a minute or 2, then finally called. He answered saying, "What's the problem?" as if he expected there to be one. I said in the most intimidating voice I could, "Get your kids out of the house right now. You and your boys are fucked." He hung up on me. I tried calling back, and what do you know? It was a throwaway phone. I'd like to tell you what happened that night, but I don't know. I never found out. I never heard a word from my weed guy or Kenny ever again. I would have heard my weed guy died, so I know he survived. As for Kenny and his boys, I really don't know. My weed guy did have an army, but just wasn't there at the right time while we were there.
Holly and I began seeing each other in May 2014. It wasn't long into our relationship she told me she was in recovery. It was similar to other stories I had heard. The habit is formed by the use of prescription drugs until the pills become too expensive and heroin becomes a more economically manageable alternative, I suppose. She had only used for a few months, and after deciding to detox in early 2014, she had relapsed a few times but nothing consistent, and said that she had not and would not use again. As someone who strongly believes that people deserve trust until they prove otherwise, I believed her. She had already shared so many things about her childhood in a dysfunctional family with an abusive stepfather who was always in control and often singled her out, her history of substance abuse starting at a very young age, her sexual escapades, and a long-time pattern of reckless behavior. All of these things I accepted and embraced as experiences that helped mold her into the person I was falling in love with. I didn't think she would have a reason to lie to me. Fast forward 3 months. In August 2014, Holly overdosed on heroin right in front of me. It all happened so fast, and thinking about it now, the events that took place are kind of a blur, but I will never forget how everything felt. Earlier that evening, we had picked up her best friend, Kyle, to come spend the night at our apartment. He had recently gotten out of jail where he spent a few months on drug charges. Holly was beaming with excitement for the reunion. On the ride back to our apartment, everything seemed perfect. The best friends began catching up, and I got to know a bit about the main man in my girlfriend's life. I could feel how happy Holly was to have him with us, and her joy was infectious. It didn't take long for those carefree feelings to be replaced by the most intense fear I've ever felt in my life. Getting back to our apartment, Kyle grabbed his duffel bag from the trunk. We locked the car, climbed the 2 flights of stairs to our place, still happy and full of energy. Holly and Kyle kept chatting excitedly as they both went into the kitchen, and as Kyle started pouring himself a drink, Holly excused herself to the bathroom, and I settled on the couch, relaxing and enjoying the back and forth banter between the two friends. Shortly after, Holly came out of the bathroom all smiles and plopped herself next to me on the couch, seeming so vibrant, and she asked Kyle a question or something. As he was responding, chatting on, her laugh went silent. The spark in her eye disappeared, and they slowly rolled back into her head. Her body went limp, and her skin began turning blue. I said, Kyle, something's wrong. What the fuck do I do? I was yelling at that point as he shuffled the short distance from the kitchen, hovering over her limp and lifeless body, talking to her, voice getting louder and louder, and he began slapping her. Kyle, should I call 911? What the fuck, Kyle? I said. Yeah, call him, he said. I took out my phone, and as I was doing that, he said, no, just help me. Pick up her legs, we gotta get her in the shower now. I didn't know what to do. I had never been through this before, so I just did what I was told. I know I was screaming as I helped him get her into the shower. Weakly and pathetically, I might add. He was yelling at me to pick her legs up. But I couldn't help it. I was paralyzed with terror, just doing everything I was told. He told me to turn on the water, make sure it was ice cold. I honestly thought it was all over as I stood there, shaking and crying, looking down through my tears and trying to aim the cold water on her face as I watched him slap her repeatedly, shaking her and yelling her name. Long story short, Holly survived. As she regained consciousness, my fear was slowly replaced with relief and then anger. I stood there staring at her, stumbling out of the tub, obviously high and oblivious to what had just happened. I began to shake. For a brief moment, I couldn't look at her. I still didn't know exactly what she had taken, but I wasn't stupid. She hadn't just had too much to drink or took some other pills that hit her the wrong way. This was serious. This was body bag serious. I remember my whole body convulsing as I stumbled from the bathroom to the bedroom. I sat on the bed in the dark and began to cry. The crying turned to sobbing, and then some sort of tear-filled, screaming, pillow-hitting combination, which continued for hours. It took me a while to finally work through all of the emotions that surfaced from that night and to genuinely forgive her. Not only was I trying to cope with the reality of what I had experienced or how close I came to losing the person that I loved, but I also felt betrayed. For the first time since being with Holly, I felt really alone. In the days that followed, Holly admitted to have used heroin 6 to 8 times while we had been dating and never told me because she was ashamed. I can't say that I blame her. It's one thing to say that someone is popping pills or using recreational drugs or even a raging alcoholic, but it's a different story when it's heroin, and Holly would be the first person to admit that. As a side note, if you've ever seen the movie Pulp Fiction, you might remember the epic Get the Shot scene, where John Travolta stabs Uma Thurman with a syringe of adrenaline after she accidentally overdoses on heroin thinking it's cocaine. Well, as sick and twisted as it might seem, that particular scene is somewhat of an inside joke in our household.
I was 23 years old, married, with a stepdaughter. I'm no longer married with a stepchild, just so you all know. Long story, but we shared a large townhouse with my cousin, her husband, and her son. A few months after we moved in, another couple moved into the basement apartment. They were a little bit weird but quiet, so I wasn't complaining. After a little while being there, they started getting louder, fighting and screaming at each other all the time. Strange and almost delusional-like behavior. They were obviously abusing substances, just like myself at the time, except I was a functioning addict. I didn't seem high, but the decisions I made were definitely altered by the drugs I used. I started getting suspicious of this guy, Joe. I looked up his criminal records and found that he had a few domestic assault charges, and worst of all, a pending sexual assault charge involving a child under the age of 12. He didn't have to register because it was still pending. I then found out he sexually abused his girlfriend's children, and that's why she didn't have custody of them. I had it out for him now. We used to let the kids play outside in the street because we lived at the end of a dead end, and there was no traffic besides us. They would leave their toys around the yard and sometimes the sidewalk. We started finding their toys broken. Not just slightly broken, destroyed. You could almost see the anger in which it was broken out of. We suspected it was Joe, but we couldn't prove it. One day I was on my way home and I got a call from my cousin. I was just about to pull onto the street and she said, "I think we're gonna have some problems." I asked why, and she said, "Joe is taking trash and all kinds of shit and throwing it out the house down the embankment. He's yelling shit and acting seriously crazy. He also knocked over all of our trash and recycling bins." I could feel my blood boiling as I pulled up. I could see my stepdaughter across the street playing with the neighbors in their fenced-in yard. Then I pulled into the driveway to see all of our trash and recyclables scattered across the driveway. I pulled in and got out of the car quick. I got on my feet and looked over to the door. Right as I looked, he appeared in the doorway and we locked eyes. I yelled, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" He yelled back at me, "What the fuck are you gonna do about it?" Then started charging at me. When he got to me, I felt very threatened. My reaction was punching the 6'7" dude square in the face. To my surprise, he stumbled, giving me the chance to hit him some more. I took that opportunity. He fell to the ground while trying to grab onto the hood of his van for leverage, failing to do so. At this point, my cousin was on her way down after hearing the commotion, and my 8-year-old stepdaughter made her way over to me. She was screaming and way too close to Joe and I. It was dangerous. I motioned her away and gave Joe the opportunity to punch me square in the nose, breaking it instantly. I went blind. I could feel him hitting me over and over and over again. My arms felt like spaghetti. I finally got a chance to wipe my eyes. When I did, I saw my neighbor with Joe in a headlock. Joe was still trying to hit me, despite me already being covered in blood and us already being broken up. We ended up in the yard yelling at each other. He was yelling some crazy shit at me like, "Your bird shits in my house." My bird was 4 floors up from him and didn't even shit on my floor, never mind his. That shit is impossible. I was yelling back at him while the whole neighborhood gathered to watch the commotion. "Nobody wants you here. You're a fucking diddler. You're a fucking child molester." He went quiet. Then in an instant, he disappeared. He took off into the train tracks that were at the dead end. The police came and I left in an ambulance. My nose was broken, obviously, and Joe was nowhere to be found. When I came home from the hospital, I couldn't find my car and house keys anywhere. I remember dropping my iPhone and keys on the ground before the scuffle started. My phone was there, no keys. I called the police station to see if they picked up Joe and to see if he had my keys. Was he picked up? Yup. 2 hours after the report. Did he have my keys? Yup. Did I press further charges for that? Fuck yeah. I ended up getting a restraining order, but nothing could be done about him living in the same house as me. My landlord heard what happened and immediately wanted to evict him. When he got out of jail, he walked up the street with both middle fingers up, as if he was giving a big fuck you to the whole neighborhood. My neighbors ended up setting up their security camera and caught Joe crawling around my car. I don't know what he was doing, but he ran back to his van laughing with his crazy girlfriend. Another time, his girlfriend started yelling at us from the front yard, and Joe was standing at our door, seemingly waiting for one of us to come out. My landlord did evict them, and they did leave. I was so relieved. Fuck those people. I still see his girlfriend walking around in the city. I always want to pull up and call her a fucking loser, but I don't. I just proceed with being a decent person. I was 18 years old when this happened. I lived in a nice house in a bad area. This was right before I moved out of my parents' house, so I was living with them. They worked second shift, so they weren't home between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 11 at night. At this time, it was about 9 at night. I had been cleaning for a couple of hours with all the shades open and all the lights on, with the music blasting. My older brother, whom had already moved out, decided to stop in for a surprise visit. He liked to come visit me and go upstairs to visit my grandfather, who lived in the apartment upstairs. I turned the music down, put the vacuum away, and sat to chill and talk to my brother for a little bit. Mid-conversation, we started hearing loud bangs at the door. I had 2 big black labs, and by this time, they were going insane, barking and snarling. The door was locked, thankfully, because not only was the stranger banging at the door, he was jiggling the handle furiously. My brother stood by the door, and I looked out the window. I saw a man with jeans and a white t-shirt on. There was blood all over his shirt and face, and he was screaming for me to let him in. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. My dogs would have torn him apart. He started trying to break the door down. My brother was pushing all his weight up against the door, while this guy was trying to break through it. I remember looking at my brother as he looked back with a shocked face, saying, "Call the police." This guy was hitting the door so hard that it was jerking my brother's body and head back at each blow. I called the police as he was still trying to force his way in. My brother looked like he was about to give up until I came over to help him hold the door closed. The door was hit so hard that the deadbolt piece that you turn to lock actually popped off. All of a sudden, it just stopped. I looked out the window and saw the man run up the street. He knew we had called the police. If he actually needed help, he would be thrilled to hear the police were coming. He also could have gone into my grandfather's door, which was right on the side of ours and wide open. The screen was closed, but it was wide open and the light was on. Why wouldn't he go in there? Anyways, the police came and we explained everything. They took our statement and left. About 20 minutes later, there were more police cars and ambulances all up the street. We never found out if he was caught or if he ended up breaking into somebody else's house. I honestly think that this guy knew I was home alone. I had been cleaning with all the blinds up, and my entire living room could be seen from the street. I think my brother came just in time. Hey guys, thank you for making it through the whole video. I hope you liked it. Now you know me a little bit more at least. I'm gonna be posting another video this week very soon, within the next few days, with a special guest, Fantasies of Fright. Check out his page. He's really good and he does a lot of creepypastas. Thank you for sticking around and watching. Like and subscribe and comment.